Okay, we looking at something, huh? All right, let's do it. Well, actually, need my face
When we
on the
talk
screen.
about buck breaking, we have to understand that buck breaking is a show of power, it's a show of dominance. So
I'm
we
going
can't
in
talk
kind of
about
fast.
buck breaking
Hold
without
on.
talking about power.
It's going in kind of fast. I'm not really even aware. Because if my face on the screen, I need to know. I ain't built like a lot of you niggas. I don't give a fuck. Where my shit at?
Society, they spend a lot of money and resources pushing different types of agendas to black society because they try to confuse us sexually. And if they can confuse you sexually, as our brother Neely Fuller said, they can confuse you in any other type of way.
When we look at the domination of black people by the dominant society, what we are in essence seeing is that this society wants to ensure that we are not able to actually meet out that thing that makes humans exist. And that is creating families and procreating.
See, psychologically, when we're talking about the sexualizing of our people, primarily from the dominant society of the system of white supremacy,
Creating families. Something we should all aspire to do. I actually don't think I'm here for any other reason. Create a family involved, but yeah, create a family overall. So, still not liking how it's playing. So let's see.
it had to be established in a very impinging way from the mental state, meaning everything that was done had to have a sexual undertone. Most of the time, it was mostly direct. So you had to enforce a level of dominance sexually in order to destroy the mind and the spirit simultaneously. So it was always everything that I do, I'm going to reinforce it sexually. Everything that I say, I'm going to reinforce it sexually. Everything that I am going to manipulate and use on you has to be done sexually in order for you to understand that you are controlled. You are my slave. You are beneath me in every single way, shape, and form.
This whole notion that masculinity is somehow toxic and detrimental to society is nothing but an attempt to emasculate black malehood. When you take away someone's right to deny sex.
Yeah, and that corresponds directly with my previous post. Toxic masculinity is a scam in itself, and it's propaganda. If you don't watch it, you will be tricked by them people.
Your sex acts that go beyond norm, then you violated the human being space of that person.
It's clearly an agenda. If you have two eyes in your head and you're able to see, you can see that it's an agenda, and it's an agenda to decrease our population.
See, LGBTQ is like a political party, like the Democrats or the Republicans. So if you're black, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a Democrat. You could be an independent or a Republican.
It's always been about destroying the black family. The family is the foundation of the people. You can't mistreat people if they're unified. You need division. You need all sorts of pathological behavior and conduct.
See, the first order beings on this planet.
Reasons why communications and conversations are important. Social media has connected us, but it's also isolated a lot of people. People think that they know things and know about people because they see certain posts, which is improper and not factual. Because you can see the post, hey, what's on your mind, which Facebook asks you, but I often post things that are happening around the world. I'm very much into current events, and I like to speak on certain topics. I rarely, if ever, tell people what's on my mind. Unless I love you, you might know what's on my mind.
People like us, we're first orders. Why? Because we don't need anybody else's energies except our own. But second order entities need to feed on you because they don't have a direct connection to the One Most High.
The heterosexual black male is last on the pecking order here in America. If you're just a heterosexual black man, how you gonna beat the case?
That's gonna change. Believe it. Heterosexual black men, quote unquote, back in. And there's other things I wanted to mention, but about this black word, but we gonna keep it lit for now.
Because when you show up to court, when you show up to the job interview, when you show up to wherever, you coming in here as a heterosexual black man, you have no power.
When Mark Twain confessed that we white people ground the manhood out of the Negro. Why ground the manhood out of the Negro? Because it's black masculinity that most exposes the fraud of white masculinity. We as
Bars.
progenitors of culture, the ones who are the fathers and mothers of civilizations, who taught all people, who people look to for social cues, whether they want to realize it or not. I think they feel if they can get us to adapt to it, they can get everybody to adapt to it.
If anybody should have a problem with European males, it should be the European female. Because everything the European male has ever learned to do to us, he first practiced on his own woman.
We need resources in education. We need resources in labor. We need resources in politics. We need resources in medical. We need resources in so many things, but they ignore that and they put millions and even billions of dollars to tell us that you need to really embrace your LBGT side. So these people have an agenda, and it's up to us to understand what the agenda is.
I will never accept that government running out of money scam. First of all, the money doesn't exist. It's pure numbers that they type up in computers and come up with this shit out their ass. But if you know about fiat and private commercial paper, you should know it's a will, it's a way. And if they got money for wars, they got money to feed the poor.
In order for us to fully grasp the concept of buck breaking and the historic sexual exploitation of black people under the global system of white supremacy, we first have to go back into the history of Europe, and we have to understand what created this ideology and the mindset of the white supremacists.
The European culture have no history of a civilizing educational process called culture before they meet us. So you're dealing with someone that's moving from the level of the animal, responding only to instincts and desires. And whatever it takes to fulfill that, raping, murdering, plundering, pillaging, has been the history of Europe.
They created a perverted way of looking at nature. And so it becomes important that when we look at them, it's not just what they do, it's the perversion of what they do. In an ice age, you're going to create a certain mentality. When you are in a sun age, you're going to create a certain mentality. So what is very natural becomes unnatural in the ice. However, when you come back to the natural, you bring your unnatural with you.
The European sexual culture operated at the level of animal, responding to physical yearn and physical stimulation. The sacredness and the value that the African placed on giving birth was just the complete opposite in Europe. And so that's why you find so many occasions of Europeans involving themselves with the animals they were raising. I mean, they've passed laws in Scandinavian countries, even today, that said having sex with sheep is appropriate.
The Greeks had gods devoted to, like Pan, which is a freak, like a satyr, which means like an animal that did people and animals. Or Ganymede, the god that was bisexual. If he showed up, you had to like give him some. It was good. If you didn't, you got in trouble. I mean, you have people have a pantheon where you have gods that are freaks that come and screw people. Some of them are almost animal-like. You've got Bacchus. If you look at, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Bacchus, but I've seen a picture of Bacchus where he's a dude carrying this big thing of wine with hummingbirds or something with strings holding his penis up. A big, long penis, a big thing of booze. If that's your God, okay, I mean, all bets off the table that it stops there, right?
When the Aryans, the Indo-Aryans, ran up into Black India, not only did they savage the place, not only did they brag and boast in their sacred literature about flaying the black gods, flaying the black skin of the gods, but they bragged about sodomizing the black god.
And they went right in. I did not expect this. They went right in. You gonna get this work, huh?
As a matter of fact, as a part of their culture, you have agreements. This is how it was. If you had a boy that you were, having sexual relations with, 12, 13, 14, 15, you'd have to do a number of things. One, you'd have to promise him protection. Two, you'd have to promise that you would educate him. Three, you'd have to make sure that you would always provide for him, whatever that may be. There were actual terms and agreements when it came to
Who is sitting around painting them pictures, man? God damn.
you having sexual relations with a little boy back in ancient Greek and Rome.
Professor Jane Ward, for example, in her book Not Gay, documents that a critical element of white male masculinity is the ability to have gay sex as a straight white man. She said that's a critical element of white male masculinity. So the very concept of white masculinity is predicated upon the ability to sodomize, to have.
A human being is only as great or as worse as his or her environment. In an ice age, where you are dealing with these temperatures, your babies are freezing in your arms to death. No mercy.
I've been trying to do
And
that
so they
too.
have this mentality of just of viciousness because they are reflecting their environment. And so when the ice ages began to melt, give or take about maybe 5,000, 7,000 years ago, they came back across the mountains. And when they came back across the mountains, they brought that mentality with them. When you're in the ice, you're not really thinking about healthy relationships. And quite frankly, when the urge hits you, any hole will do.
Heterosexual sex for the white man's the only
Lies. Any hole will not do. Lies. Only one hole will properly suffice the phallus.
purpose of that is procreation. In fact, hetero sex with a woman was a necessary evil to white folks. For pleasure, homosexual sex is preferred.
When Europeans ventured out and first began to interact with black society, there was a notable contrast of sexual behavior.
That's one of the discrepancies that I have with a lot of people in this community. Europeans, it's a misnomer because original Europeans look like me and you. They didn't get down like this, but for the sake of this DVD, we gonna let them keep saying they the European.
Between these two cultures.
Typically, when people talk about buck breaking, they start on the plantation and they begin with the sexual abuse that our ancestors suffered on the plantation. But that sexual abuse started in West Africa when the Portuguese first encountered the West African men and women.
When we see all of the statues of naked Greeks and Romans with their extremely small penises, I think that we have to recognize that in some ways they are trying to emulate the African comfort with our bodies. But because this is not something that is native to their cultural norm, it begins to be misshapen.
What man from what ethnic group can stand up against a black man toe to toe in manhood? Nobody. Especially the European, who is at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to genetic stability.
All the way back in Rome, in Greece, some of the rulers were transgenders. They would travel at night dressed as women to go hang out at brothels and go mingle with the people as a woman. This is the king of the whole nation, and he hanging out here looking like Betsy.
I remember reading an article many years ago about Romans in the Colosseum used to get giraffes to have sex with the old horse, and the giraffes had such large genitalia, women would bleed to death, and the audiences loved it.
When white Arabs began to gain control over parts of black society, there was an immediate attack on black male sexuality. In an early form of buck breaking, the castration of black males and turning them into eunuchs began to happen on a regular basis.
They said the eunuchs would be sometimes so close to the king that they would get so much information. So they'd castrate them so that they couldn't start their own dynasties. Okay, they couldn't go out and now impregnate somebody with this knowledge, this king knowledge.
They would castrate them by cutting off their testicles and their penis completely because of population control and due to them not wanting them to procreate. This goes all the way back then, and they did not want any spread of them because they didn't consider them to be human beings. So at that time, the castrating and the creation of eunuchs was, we don't mind allowing you to be around us, but we have to make sure that you can't dominate us, that you have no power drive, that you have no interest whatsoever in our women, because you're going to destroy our numbers and you're going to increase in yours and you're going to spread, and we don't want that to happen. So they wouldn't mind having little black boys or black men around them as long as they could not actually be considered men and do anything that would be of interest to the women that they had.
Or you look at the ancient Greeks, the most feared fighters were the gay ones. And what would they do? They would tie two guys together at the ankle. If you've ever heard the expression, joined at the ankle, that's because they get two guys that liked each other, tie their ankles together. They die for each other. Put them up. They fight anybody. You go touch my man, I'll kill you. Don't look at my man.
Well, why would anybody be shocked about a gay person in Africa when you've got the Catholic Church, which is a gay institution, a continuation of the Greco-Roman pedophilia and homosexuality in Africa, dominating these people for 200 or 300 years.
It is the case that there is evidence of homosexuality prior to the colonialism of the 19th century. But that pre-colonial homosexuality was brought by white Muslims. While it's pre-European, it's still foreign and white. It was the Turks who brought in the Mamluks. When the Mamluks, the slave soldiers of Islamic civilization, who were Turks, when they ruled Egypt, they brought homosexuality to Africa.
I think it's really interesting that right in the center of St. Peter's Square, when the Pope opens the shades of his window, he looks out at the structure that is often called the obelisk today. We should know that the obelisk is the symbol of the Tsar's erect penis. So that while they're removing penises, the Pope looks out at a large black penis every morning when he opens his shades. The irony cannot be lost.
by the time the plantation systems were created in the Americas, the white supremacists learned how to master more strategic and insidious ways on how to break black men, and by extension, they learned how to break the spirit of black families.
Because in the patriarchal context, the male is considered the strength. And so if you break the male, then you break the woman and you break the children. So when I think of buck breaking, I don't solely think about just the male per se. And then we have to understand that it also wasn't just sex either. You know, when you're breaking somebody, you can break them spiritually. You know, do different things. It doesn't have to be just sodomy. And so a lot of us, when we focus on buck breaking, we think about the African man or the African captive being taken out, you know, on the plantation, being brought in front of, you know, the women and children and sodomized in front of everybody. But another part of buck breaking is not being able to protect your children, being able to protect your women, not being able to provide for them. That's also breaking the man mentally and spiritually.
On plantations like this, we know that a lot of the black women who were enslaved here were exploited sexually, and we know this because of the offspring and the children they had. The children were mulatto octoroon, so that was the evidence of the sexual exploitation. But one thing that is not talked about is the sexual exploitation that happened to the black men on these plantations.
The whole European expansion, that was a homosexual enterprise. Victorian expansion, British expansion, most of those colonels were homosexuals. In fact, in a very important book, Homosexuality and Colonization, it's documented that European colonies were all seen as homosexual playgrounds.
Part of the whole buck breaking process was the emasculation of the male slave. And so they would take probably the strongest, most resilient, most resistant, most outspoken of the enslaved to make an example of him in front of everyone else. And part of making that example of him was to go through a process of complete and total humiliation, which included public flogging, which included actual rape.
As men, they would actually tie our hands down, spread our hands, spread our legs, and they would physically rape us. Slave masters would rape black men in front of his entire family, sometimes in front of the whole plantation. They bring them all out. The bigger the black man, the stronger the black man, the more they would rape him, the more they would buck him, just to make sure that none of them would be inspired to do anything to fight back.
There's a lot of evidence of the white slave owners who were practicing sodomy against the black males. You had people like Thomas Thistlewood in Jamaica who talked about some of the black men who were sodomized out there.
It comes with an admission on both sides. You know, the black man doesn't really want to admit that he was in such a weakened state that he was able to be, you know, buck broken by the slave master.
During antebellum slavery, around that time, homosexuality was still illegal, but you had a lot of white men who would practice it, especially on the enslaved people that they had on their plantations. And they would also have relations with each other that was very covert, and a lot of people didn't know about it. There was one white slave owner, James Hammond. He had diaries that are infamous, and there's a book about his diaries and his life where he sent a letter to another slave owner, Thomas Withers, and they were having a gay relationship with each other. Hammond was a known pedophile at the time. He molested some of his own nieces. So we know some of the things that he was doing to the black people, especially the black men on those plantations.
It was continually a process of making sure that there was no energy to do anything against me. You're not going to fight me. Why? Because I just destroyed your champion. I just destroyed your man. I just destroyed your father, your brother, your uncle, your grandfather. I destroyed him. And he's your protector because you are consciously and culturally imbued with the idea that the man is the protector and the provider. So if I destroy your protector and your provider, you will become my slave by default.
The white LGBT community, they...
All right, what we're not going to do is get too lost in the sauce. And I could do without all of that right now. Let me see what else going on. Come back to this. If y'all hear all of these names and people that they speak of, Y'all should be taking notes. Or go get this DVD yourself and tap in.
Most say it was a way to prevent white men from being attracted to the beauty of black women. But considering that black women had to wear head wraps and we could create the most Erykah Badu style, that it was still attracting white men's attention, and white women could not mimic that head wrap style. And so that it actually became a threat because the white men were more interested in the black women in Louisiana than the white.
Out here in Louisiana, during slavery, on plantations just like this, the French was dominating this area. And whenever there were black people who ran away from the plantations, they would get branded. And the brand would be a logo of the French heraldry. It's the fleur de lis. And they would get branded on their shoulder, or they would get branded on their cheek with this fleur de lis logo. And what's interesting about this logo, now today, this same logo is the logo for the New Orleans Saints football team. So a football team dominated by black people playing today are walking around with logos of runaway slaves.
And it's so ironic that so much of the brutality meted out against African men, against black men, is supposedly because we are lusting for white women, something that we have no record of happening whatsoever.
In the Caucasian culture, they have this sadistic type of mentality when it comes to sex, where the more depraved, the more nasty, the more disgusting, the more immoral you can get, the more enticing and attractive it is. They even choke themselves while they're masturbating, while they're being, involving themselves in sex, because they believe that increases the strength of the orgasm. So that symbolically is something that they were looking at when they were lynching black men. They would lynch us because that choking is something so they could see his power leaving his body, but they would get somewhat of this erotic type of orgasmic feeling about it.
When we talk about the white LGBT community trying to make comparisons,
So I think that in the 60s there was more choice. You had the ability to step away from that and into something else. Back during the times of slavery, there was no choice. You couldn't step away from your blackness. You were reminded of it every day, and there was no other thing that you could run and hide behind and call yourself feminist over calling yourself a black woman.
They take all of these dead black males, young black men, and they convert them to a bait and switch thing to support black lesbianism and the destruction of the black families.
Feminism became the
I'm only gonna get it
battering ram that broke in or crashed in the doors of Congress and opened the way for homosexual rights.
Well, after Nate Parker's Birth of a Nation came out, which I thought was an excellent film, one of the things I saw was a push by black feminists to remove Nat Turner's name from his own rebellion and suggest that it should just be everyone that lived in the area. It should just be named after the area as opposed to honoring Nat Turner. So this idea that, well, we like the sacrifice, we like the rebellion, but we just have to remove this black male face from it.
They did the same thing with Nat Turner. They tried, they put the bone out that he was involved. I think it was called Confessions of Nat Turner. It was a white dude that went to, I guess, the prison right before he was hung, and he claims that Nat Turner confessed to having same-sex relationships. But this is about population control. We have to understand that. It's about population control, and it's also about destroying the oldest institution in the world, and that's the black family. Black families are essential to building a black nation. And so if you want to destroy a nation, well, we had to destroy the family. How do we destroy the family? Well, we put a wedge between the fundamental building blocks of a family, and that's the black man and black woman.
So the white LGBT community, they used the incident at Stonewall Inn in New York to create a lot of myths and misconceptions about what happened there. And they've used that, the myths of what happened there, as a part of their civil rights history. The Stonewall Inn was a gay club in New York in 1969. In the 1960s in New York, there were a lot of gay clubs. The police just kind of looked the other way. the mafia was controlling these clubs, and the mafia had a lot of criminal activity going on in these clubs. The police knew about it, and the police were corrupt. They would get paid off to look the other way. Now, sometimes when the police wouldn't get their payoffs, they would raid places, and the Stonewall Inn was one of those places. There was a lot of illegal activity in there. That's why it got raided. It didn't get raided because there were gay people in there. That's a lie that they like to tell. That is not why it got raided. It got raided because of the criminal activity. What happened was there happened to be black people at that particular club partying with the white LGBT people. The black people began to get beaten by the police. They fought the police, and that's what the Stonewall riot was. It was a lot of the black people fighting the police up there in New York. The white LGBT community, they flipped that into them getting abused because of their sexuality. They even made a movie where the main character was a white man, and the white man didn't even exist. So there are a lot of lies about the Stonewall Inn.
The police were shaking these people up for money, and they fought back. And many of those people were black and Puerto Rican.
They're changing the history, not only when it comes to the people, the movements, but also the sexual orientation of the people in the movements. Brother Malcolm X, for example, I heard this narrative from some new documentary that came out, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, I believe was the name of the documentary. Manny Marable, who was a person, the primary individual who was a part of that, who wrote a book that took nearly 20 years to write, is the primary person, and there were others, who came up with this narrative that Brother Malcolm was gay.
They're also, not only have they taken our labor or our music, they're also taking our legacy. So, they want to make all our leaders gay. I saw a book in the Library of Congress just saying Benjamin Banneker is gay. So I guess maybe he made a dildo along with the clocks and stuff. We just don't know that. We'll find out one day. We'll find these papers right.
Our brother Fred Hampton, Black Panther leader out of Chicago, he was the person who had something called the Rainbow Coalition. That was the Black Panthers working with different groups to have a coalition and to have an allyship in order to fight against injustice. After our brother was assassinated by the government and the COINTELPRO program that LGBT J. Edgar Hoover put together, that Rainbow Coalition got co-opted by some of the older civil rights people like Jesse Jackson. He had the Rainbow Coalition, and then the white LGBT community got a hold of that Rainbow Coalition and rode the coattails of that.
Yeah, they took that word, essentially rainbow meaning all different colors. You have to see what it colors, that's the difference. Now they began to co-opt that, the LGBT community, or the gay community, I'm just going to call it that, you're going to just factor it down to the gay community. They took the rainbow color as their own when Jesse Jackson's whole Rainbow Coalition came up on an investigation anyway.
See, one of their problems is they're homosexual, same sex. See, it used to be the male gender and the female gender had sex together, but when it was male on male or female on female, that was bad. But see, they've taken that word gender over the last 20 years, 25 years, and they have converted it so now there is one long spectrum with 58 genders on it. So that gets rid of the onus of same sex if there's only one sex.
There was an incident that happened in 1977 with Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor did a charity event, I think it was a charity event in Hollywood at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was a white LGBT event, and Richard, I don't think he knew the crux of what was going on with it, but when he went up there to do his routine, he kind of snapped on the audience. He cursed the audience out because he felt like the white LGBT community was using him, because he pointed out that they were talking about justice for them, the white LGBT community, and they were trying to compare their struggle with black struggles. But some of the people who were performing, who were black at that same event, they were being discriminated against, and Richard Pryor didn't like it. So he went out there and just cussed the whole audience out. He was telling them, if you're talking about justice, where were all you people during the Watch riots, which happened just a decade before that event? So he called them out, and it was a very infamous incident where he cussed that white LGBT audience out.
In the school system, you see that any boys who show hypermasculinity, what they will call, or toxic masculinity, what they will call, which is like boys being rambunctious, being themselves, showing agency for themselves, get punished. They get sent out of class. They are hard to.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up. But really wanted to bring forth today and speak on is I want to start like a book club or something. I think that it would be powerful if we come together and discuss different books, break down different topics amongst each other. Doesn't have to necessarily be on live or on Facebook, but I think that yeah, I want to do like a book club. We could pick a few books, break them down, different topics: financial literacy, ancient history, current events, the future, space age. I'm in the books, and anybody is interested, I think that we could connect these dots. So inbox me or comment on this video. Let's start a book club and have some fun learning. Until next time, hope y'all protect your neck. Don't let your chin touch your chest, and keep your head up, baby. Love y'all.